Over the past 2 years on this channel, I have looked at a couple of these strange handheld ports for LEGO Star Wars. Whether it was the completely broken DS game for LEGO Star Wars 2, or the PSP version of LEGO Star Wars 2 that is super scaled down and has a bunch of weird features, all the way to pretty much a forgotten Game Boy Advance game for LEGO Star Wars the video game. Each one had their own special quirks that made them really special or, well, really bad. And the one I'll be talking about in this video is no different. Now, this game, LEGO Star Wars 2 on the Game Boy Advance, is, well, obviously the sequel to LEGO Star Wars the video game on the Game Boy Advance. Now, if you've already watched my video about that game, you probably know that that game was extremely weird. And you're probably looking at this game thinking it's probably going to be just as weird, if not worse. But you might be surprised whenever I tell you that this game is actually completely different, and it is much better than the previous one. Now, I'm not saying this game is spectacular or even great, as we'll see later in the video, but in terms of recreating the LEGO Star Wars experience in a 2D environment, they did a much better job in this. Now, LEGO Star Wars 2 on the Game Boy Advance was released by our favorite developer, Amaze Entertainment, and we have talked about that developer a lot on this channel, and we can never seem to really get away from them. But if you're new here and have never heard of them before, Amaze Entertainment was a company that made handheld ports for larger game developers. You see, way back in the day, a smaller handheld device like the Game Boy Advance or the DS would be nowhere near as powerful as, say, the PS2 or Wii. So to be able to release their title on, say, the DS or even PSP, they would either have to scale their game way down or completely remake it from scratch. Companies would usually either just create a completely different dev team to do this, or hire a different company like Amaze Entertainment or something like that to do this process for them. Because as you can imagine, creating a separate dev crew inside the company already working on a massive title can be super expensive and take away from the main game itself. Now, with that knowledge, if you've watched my video about LEGO Star Wars the video game on the Game Boy Advance, you would know that that game was developed by Kryptonite Games. And due to how different this game plays compared to that one, it may not be apparent that Amaze Entertainment and Kryptonite Games are actually just the same company. You know, one day I'll probably end up making a video about this company and its strange history, but for now we're just going to focus on this game. Upon opening the game for the first time, you'll probably notice that this game is, well, 2D. And like I mentioned in the other video, this is on the Game Boy Advance, and there's really no way to make a true 3D game for it, especially one of this scale. And this is where the similarities to the last game end, because like I mentioned earlier, this game is totally different from the last one. For one, there is actually a hub area this time, and this is much better than just a menu like in the last game to pick which level you wanted to play. Well, that's actually kind of a lie, because the only thing this hub world does is that it sends you to the episodes, where you're then sent to a menu to select your level, so it is kind of the same, I guess. But even though this hub area is really only for episode selection, it's still better than nothing. Upon opening the first level, you will notice right off the bat that this plays and feels a lot more like what a LEGO Star Wars game should. All of the weird and janky mechanics from the last game are pretty much gone. There's no stamina bar, there's 4 hearts, and most importantly, whenever you die, you just respawn. There's no more checkpoints, making this game a whole lot easier to play through, especially whenever enemies are just respawning all the time. In terms of level design, they're still pretty bare bones. I do think it's a little bit better in this one, but the goal is still pretty much just to blast your way through the area and find the exit. There's no real challenges or puzzles anywhere. There are areas that have you kill a certain amount of enemies to progress, and the game makes you build some droid panels and some platforms, but that's really about it. I will say it is very easy to lose track of where you're at in these levels though, especially on Cloud City and Endor. And that's mainly because pretty much every part of the level looks identical. There are some areas that look a little bit different, but most of the time it just ends up looking the same, and it's very easy to get lost. Another issue that this game has that carries over from the last game is that there's really no feel of depth at all in this. I know it was a big complaint that I had in the other game, and it's still pretty much the same here. It's really hard to tell where objects really are in the map. A lot of the time you just find yourself dying, falling into things you didn't even know were there. And this gets super annoying because most of the time you have to time your jump just right to make it. So all this does is just make you extremely frustrated trying to make it through the level. Another thing that's super frustrating about this game is the lag. I know we talked about lag in LEGO Star Wars 2 for the DS, but lag in this game is just as bad, if not worse. Some parts of the game are completely fine, and then other parts look like you're playing this game in slow motion. Trying to navigate through levels like these at 10 FPS, as you can imagine, can be pretty tedious. I guess one bright side is that there are some levels that really don't have this issue at all and play extremely good, and then there's others like Endor that are completely unplayable. One thing I haven't mentioned yet though are the cutscenes, and these are definitely something. Unlike the slideshow cutscenes from the previous game, which were also extremely weird, these cutscenes are animated in the game, which you would think would be pretty cool until, well, you actually watch some of them. Almost none of these cutscenes make any sort of sense at all. Pretty much the only thing going on in these cutscenes are just a bunch of 2D Lego characters standing around, giving expressions through these chat bubbles above their head. While most of these cutscenes are pretty short, there are a couple that are extremely long. Take the trash compactor scene for example. All it is an over a minute long cutscene that pans back and forth between the trash compactor crushing the main characters and C-3PO and R2-D2 trying to stop it. Indoor also has a cutscene like this that's kinda similar, but it's just one shot with the main characters making random expressions. I mean, I appreciate the effort from the developers trying to recreate the scenes in the movies, but I mean, this is a Game Boy Advance port for LEGO Star Wars. You can't really recreate that. And you know, I actually probably would be okay with these cutscenes if they just gave you a way to skip them. But they didn't do that, so you're just stuck there watching them for minutes on end, with no way of skipping them as they waste your time. But hey, one thing that they added that was pretty cool was the vehicle levels. And believe it or not, they actually were pretty decent. You know, I'm actually kind of surprised these even made it into the game in the first place. I know these levels were thankfully absent from the previous game, but I guess it wouldn't have made a lot of sense not having them in this game, so I guess that's why they're here. All in all though, these vehicle levels are actually pretty simple to play through. Similar to the regular levels, you're really just trying to find a way out of the area that you're in. While sometimes it does have you do some sort of task in the middle of the level, normally there's really not a whole lot to do in these. And one of those levels in particular, the asteroid field level, takes that simplicity to the extreme. And to demonstrate what I'm talking about, I'm going to go ahead and show you the entire level start to finish, not sped up or anything, to show you what I'm talking about. Now, why they made this level so short, I really have no idea. But I think it's kinda odd that they made the asteroid field level that short, but didn't give us Dagobah. I mean, if they wanted to keep the Empire Strikes Back only 5 levels, they could have just merged the asteroid field level with, say, the Dagobah level, or maybe the Hoth level, and still gave us Dagobah. But I guess we'll never know why they did that. Besides the vehicle level simplicity, the controls are, well, pretty tedious. The movement controls are still done through the D-pad, but they're not really that easy to get a handle of. The up and down buttons are how you control your speed, and the left and right buttons rotate the vehicle. This took me forever to get used to, and I normally just found myself running into things or just spinning around in circles trying to get the hang of how this controls. Now, I didn't realize this until later, but there is a directional control option in the settings. Now, for whatever reason, the default vehicle controls are rotational, but if you change them to directional, they play more like what you would be used to. I think it's kind of odd that this is just not the default setting in the first place, but at least there is a setting to change it back to normal. Besides the movement controls, there are some other unique controls that the vehicle levels have. Using the blasters is the same button as normal, but there's also a torpedo and a flip button. The torpedoes are really good for destroying turrets and other things on the ground, which is good because those turrets can actually be pretty annoying sometimes. And the flip button is really good for going in the opposite direction really quick. But the way these levels are designed, there's not a really big use for it, but it is a neat control to have. Now that we've looked at how the game works and the basic level mechanics, let's go ahead and take a look at combat. And this game actually received a lot of combat improvements from the last game. For starters, we actually have auto-aim this time, and this is an improvement that the DS and console game got as well. So auto-aim must have been a key thing to add to this title. But for this game, while it's not perfect, it is a lot better than the first Game Boy Advance game where you have no auto-aim and you have to try to aim solely with your D-pad and you really can barely hit anything at all. A neat little feature that has stuck around though is that the blasters have a charge ability. If you hold down the attack button, the blaster will charge up, and whenever you fire, it'll deliver full damage to anything that it hits. This is really useful for destroying certain objects that you have to destroy to progress, and for enemies that require multiple hits. And actually, come to think of it, I actually kind of would have loved to have seen this in the console game. I just kind of thought it would be pretty neat. Jedi characters have stayed pretty much the same outside of them not really having any abilities besides using the Force and throwing their lightsaber. Which brings us to the boss battles. Well, the 3 that are actually in this game. You have the fight on Cloud City, Jedi Destiny, and the Rank War fight. I'm just going to go over the 2 normal boss battles first, and then we can talk about that Rank War fight after. Now, one thing you'll notice about the lightsaber boss battles in this is that they are extremely easy. Unlike in the previous game where they could actually be a real challenge, in this game you can finish up a boss battle in as little as 10 seconds. Granted, if the battle doesn't break, making you restart the game. There is still a quick time mechanic in this, but it's really really not as good as the last one. I mean, it's pretty much the same, but it just doesn't seem like it's as responsive as the previous games. But they only show up randomly, and you really don't need them to finish the battle anyway. So in all reality, there's really no point for them being here. And before I talk about the Rancor boss battle, I did actually forget about the Boba Fett one, but all this really is that you're chasing Boba Fett across these two platforms. That has the depth perception issue that I was talking about earlier. Now we can talk about the Rancor fight, and well, it's really bad. Outside of the entire level just being really short to begin with, this boss battle really doesn't give any detail on how you're supposed to beat it. And to be honest, even after beating it, I'm not really sure what I was even supposed to be doing. The only real thing you probably know you have to do is lure the Rancor towards the door. But I really have no idea how to do that, because every time you put a Gamorrean guard or yourself in front of it, it just backs up. But out of sheer luck, I did manage to finally beat it, because I guess the Rancor did decide he was going to go stand under the gate long enough for me to shut it on him. And this probably gives us our most realistic and horrifying depiction of death in the entire LEGO Star Wars series. But outside of the boss battles, there are a couple other things that I did miss about combat, and one is that your second character actually, well, can kill other characters. This was a huge complaint I had about the console game, because the second character, unless you have a real person playing as it, is, well, completely useless. And outside of the Skywalker saga, I actually think this is the only game that the second character can actually do anything. So I actually kind of liked that they added that in there. And one thing that is kind of related to combat, but I really just forgot to mention it in the levels section, is that whenever you leave a particular room, all of the enemies that you killed in that room will just respawn whenever you re-enter it. This is probably due to the Game Boy Advance not being able to store a bunch of updated level data, but it's still super annoying whenever you try to enter a room to get a mini kit or something like that and have to come back out and kill all the enemies all over again. Alright, so now that we got combat and the levels out of the way, it's time to talk about a few of the things we haven't mentioned yet. And it mainly has to do with the free play part of this game. Free play is pretty much the same as the console game. You go around the map looking for collectibles and going into rooms that you weren't able to get to in story mode. Like in the console game, each level will have 10 mini kits you're supposed to find, and they're either hidden or put in plain sight for the character to collect. Unlike the mini kits in the console version that built iconic ships from the Star Wars universe, mini kits in the Game Boy Advance version and the DS2 unlock different playable characters. The Super Kits, or True Jedi mechanic, is in this game, which if you don't know is pretty much just a stud goal for each level. Unlike some LEGO games, the stud requirements for most of these levels are actually pretty reasonable, so it's actually a pretty cool mechanic, but I'm not really sure what it does whenever you get all of them. Now, you probably remember me saying at the beginning of the video that the hub world really only has one purpose, and that is level selection. Well, that's actually not the case, because there is also a store there. And like in the console game, you can buy characters, hints, extras, and use cheat codes like in the console game. Now, like in the DS game, there's only a couple of useful extras. The rest of them are just kind of wacky and fun. But that's about all I have for LEGO Star Wars 2 on the Game Boy Advance. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is a really cool one. And I'm finally glad to put out the sequel video to the other Game Boy Advance game. It took me a lot longer than I thought it would to make this video. I mean, heck, it's been a little over a year since I made that other games video, and whenever I finally sat down and started making this video, it took me way longer than I thought it would. But I'm glad to finally have it out, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. But like always, let me know down in the comments below any ideas that you guys have or any thoughts you have on the video. Those comments do help me out a lot, and it does help me out in the YouTube algorithm, so we get 2 pluses there. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The growth of this channel has been amazing, and I would love to see it continue. And like always, I'd like to say a special thanks to my super supporters on screen here. They are a massive help to the channel. And if you would like to become a member yourself, hit that join button down below, whether it be a super supporter or one of the other tiers I have. And if you don't want to use the YouTube member system, I also have a Patreon you can go check out. But like always, thank you for watching the video, and I hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys in the next one.